Hello and welcome to the second video in my right wing Nano Drak build. Now in the first one I unboxed everything and showed you how it came in the packages. Everything is very much separate. It's up to you to put it all together, and that is part of the fun, if that's the way you get your kicks. Now I'm going to put mine together and document it all in here. If you have already built something like a mini Drak or the full-size Drak, all the steps we're going to go through is going to be very, very similar. So in terms of the process, what you do, the steps that you follow, it's going to be pretty much exactly the same. But before I get too far into that, let me show you a couple of things that you're going to need in order to make this a successful build that's going to hold up in hours and hours of flying. First thing is that you're going to need a couple of very sharp blades. This kind of knife here that you can extend it completely and lay it flat is going to be perfect to cut off the nubs on things like the wings and the body. And also get yourself something like an X-Acto knife or something similar. If you haven't got a brand new blade on it, my recommendation would be treat yourself, get a new blade and pop it into your craft knife. You want something that is absolutely scalpel sharp to cut through some of the foam pieces and make this a very neat job. Now I'll look at the glue in a second, but the first thing that I like to do is just to see how flat the wings are. Now, although the carbon rods tend to be flat, and you can tell that by rolling them on something like your desk, if you put them into the wing, you should see that it's either going to be bowed up at the ends or in the middle. Actually, this is the glue that I'm using, E6000 Plus. I would recommend, if you are doing things internally, the Plus is handy. You're also going to need some masking tape like this. E6000, the non-Plus version, is smellier, but I think it's slightly stronger. So the first thing to do is let me just show you how bowed this wing is. And this is pretty standard, it just happens in shipping. It's a million miles away. So I would just note where the gap is, and then try and just use a little bit of gentle pressure just to try and get the wing as straight as you possibly can. As I'm going to glue the spars in, I'm going to put weights on it to make sure it's completely flat, and I would always recommend doing the underside first, because then you can put lots of weights on here and things like the nubbings from the castings aren't going to get in the way. Speaking of the nubs, we need to take those off. So with that new sharp knife, extend it and put it as flat as you can, and use a sawing motion to gently take each of these off. Just take your time with this. I do the ones on the inside of the wing first, and get used to doing it before you do the ones on the body, because they're going to be very visible. But by taking these off, this is also going to let the wing sit flat. You may have to go in a couple of different directions to just get it completely flat with a wing. Some people will always use things like sandpaper just to get it completely flat. I tend to find that that rips up the foam. I'm quite happy just to use a sharp knife like this and this sawing motion just to get it nice and flush with the rest of the wing surface. Once that's done, grab yourself some masking tape like this. This is just the kind of stuff you use when you go into paint walls or whatever, and cut it in half, a nice wide piece like this. It means that we're going to save a little bit of the stuff. And then what we're going to do is we're going to stick it each side of the channel on the wing so that the glue doesn't go all over each side of the foam. So carefully position it in front of the depression where the carbon spar is going to go, and just gently push it into place. We don't want a super sharp edge, that's not what this is about. And also we don't want to pull any pieces of the foam off when we remove it in a moment. This is just to make sure that we can put a nice bead of glue into this and get the carbon rod nicely seated, and then we pull these two strips off each side, and it'll just clean up the edges and take off any little bit of this very strong glue that's got on the surface of the wing. Now we've got them ready, just make sure that the carbon spars are going to fit. I personally would rough up the carbon spars with a little bit of sandpaper, and then make sure they're completely dust and grease free so that the glue has the best possible chance of sticking on. Surprising how much crap is stuck onto these things, and by removing it, it's going to make sure you get the absolute best adhesion you can. Now with these kind of applicators, these little ones, little kind of looks like a less than a millimeter at the tip, it's perfect for this. All you need to do is run a thin bead all the way along in the channel. You're not filling the channel, you're just putting a nice bead all the way along. And what we're going to do is we're going to kind of put the spar in and rotate it so it coats the spar, and then we're going to push the spar down to make sure that there aren't any air gaps, and then finally kind of push our finger along the top edge. Now the spars in the kit are kind of almost exactly the same length. There isn't any kind of particularly short or long versions, but I would just, before you do this, just test fit your spars to make sure that if you have got any ones that are slightly longer, you're putting them in the slightly longer channels on the wing. Do that for both sides. I would give it about 10 minutes just to start setting up and just start to go a little bit tacky. It should look like this, where the glue is completely covering the spar. And what you need to do then is take off the tape. Try and take it off at right angles and keep it flat. That way it won't take the surface of the foam off. And then hopefully it'll leave you with an absolutely beautiful edge that's nice and neat. Once you've done that, then pop some heavy weights on top, put the wing on something nice and flat like the bench, and then leave it overnight to set up. Make sure also give all the spars one last push just to make sure that none of them have worked up or started to pop up a little bit as you've been moving the wing about. Next step then is the motor mount. We're going to have to cut the slot for that. It's going to have to fit in, and you can actually see there are guides molded in, and I would use this knife and just work your way trying to open it up. Be very careful to make sure that everything is nice and square, and once you have that, put some glue into the gap using that tip applicator and then push it home. Also, when we've come back to it, we are going to have to put the carbon spars in this side piece here, and we're going to have to cut a channel for that to sink it in, and that's one of the reasons why these things are so bulletproof. And this is absolutely where we're going to have to use that X-Acto knife to dig in a pocket at the front and run it along. But let me just cut the stuff out of the back so we can push that motor mount in. Once the motor mount is done, I would use a couple of clamps and a little bit of weight just to make sure that that is also going to set up and be a nice strong gap. Double check that you have put it in at exactly 90 degrees and everything is in the right place before the glue sets up too much. Okay, next job then is to put in the spars into the body and into the wing. Now these are going to sit right down in the very bottom of these channels, and this is the same whether or not we're doing it in this wing section here or in the body. Again, I'm just going to rough them up slightly, make sure that there's no release agent or anything, and this slightly rougher surface gives it a stronger mechanical bind. Again, use a cloth to take any dust off, and we're going to have to use these little pieces of spare foam that come in the kit. These are going to go over the top to cap it off. Now the trick with this is that you want to make sure that there is enough glue so that everything is kept well in place, and it will almost kind of squeeze out the end, and you want to be careful not to get glue inside this hollow spar, because obviously this is where the spar is going to run. Let me just take off that little bit of dust that I've created, and while that's evaporating I'll grab the glue. Don't need the fine applicator for this. What I'm going to do, get rid of that bit of goop, is I'm just going to put a couple of little blobs along the edge here that it can push down as I push it in, because it will squidge up around the piece. And then I'm going to put a thin layer of glue all over this spar. I'm trying to coat the spar, and I'm also trying to make sure that there aren't any air voids when I push it down, but not too much glue that it's actually going to go inside the spar and make a mess of everything. So let's just kind of finish up covering this. You do get covered in glue this bit, but I find there's no other way to do it really. You have to really go for it when you put this stuff in. If you try and be too delicate, you end up with air gaps. So I'm going to push in the spar. I'm going to rotate it to make sure it's completely covered in glue, move it backwards and forwards, and then I'm going to push it down and make sure that a little bit of glue is going to squidgy out the end of the wing. Now I am going to cheat. I'm going to push in, again be very careful to make sure you don't get any glue on it. I'm going to use the actual spar itself to push it right to the very bottom. And what I'm doing is I'm pushing the far end down first and then pushing the other end, and hopefully what should happen, you should see a little bit of glue come out, and if it does, you've done it right. Again, a little bit of glue along this piece. And there's already glue in the channel, so we just want to make sure that this is going to be fine. And on the body itself, I think this these kind of caps form part of the mechanical bond. I'm not sure about it in here. Just put another couple of blobs of glue because I want to make sure, again, there aren't any air gaps. Push the piece in, start at the right side and then push it in. What you should find is that you get a little bit of glue popping out of the end. If you do, then you are golden. Again, make sure that it's seated completely, wipe off any excess glue, make sure if there is any glue close to the actual hollow tube that you clean it off as well, so that you can slide the spar in when everything's going to have set up. So when everything's together, and this is the following day, this is kind of what it looks like. So the glue's set up, that nice glossy finish, and there's our two spars that are in there. We are going to have to cut those level just like we did with the nubbins for the casting. Same kind of knife technique, keep it nice and flat and just run it along, that'll take it off. But I'm pretty happy with that. Also, what we should find now is the wing is an awful lot straighter than it was before, because the carbon spars that we've already put in it are keeping it completely level. So it's time to do the top spar exactly the same way as we've just done. So I would use the same method, put some masking tape each side, make sure that the spar is nice and evenly coated, and again, once that's done, is leave that to set up. Now, the body is a little bit different. So I've put the spars in using exactly the same technique. So here we are, we've put the spars in the bottom and we've sunk in the top pieces. You just want to push the center sections flush, and then we're going to use the knife to cut them level again. The spars are a little bit longer than they need to be. They're kind of sticking out each side. Hopefully you can see that. We're going to use a Dremel with a cutting disc to take those off. That's no big deal. A little bit of glue on there. We'll take that off to make it look a bit better. But we now need to put in the spars on each side. Now, they don't fit on the top like they do in the wing. What you need to do is cut a channel with your very, very sharp X-Acto or craft knife and then sink them into the channel. So once you have the channel cut, again, put a bead of glue with the fine tip applicator in the channel, potentially put a little bit of glue on the spar as well, and then push it into the cut that you've just made. The tip that I'll give you is I would use something like a popsicle stick or a lollipop stick just to push it down in there, and that will get it nicely seated. And once it's all together, I also wrap the entire thing in some more of that masking tape just to make sure that all of those cuts that I've made are as closed as I can get them, just for a nice cosmetic finish. So the next job is to then sort out the ailerons. Now, these are the two pieces of balsa that you get in the kit. You have to be careful to make sure you put them on the right way so that the right angle is on the bench when the wing is the right way up. They give you the maximum flex. Now, they're too big and they're not the right shape, so you need to get a straight edge and cut them so that there's a couple of millimeters clearance on each end so that they don't foul with either the vertical stabilizers or the wingtips that we're going to glue on as one of the very last things. And I just go and mark them up. You can cut them with your very sharp X-Acto, and once they're in the right shape, then use that first one that you've done to mark up the second piece of balsa wood, and again make sure that you are cutting it the right way. Once it's cut, it'll look something like this, and then I took it out to the garden, put it on a bit of scrap cardboard and sprayed it with Plasticoat. I just happened to have a can of black and let that go off for a couple of days, and then used a little bit of sandpaper just to make sure that it was completely smooth and flat. So back on the bench, it looks like this. This is kind of the shape, so hopefully you can see here how it's kind of gonna fit. Be careful with the wood here before it's all sorted. Because it is only balsa wood, it will show damage, so try not to drop anything on it. We're going to try and reinforce it, but hopefully you can see here how it's been kind of sprayed and rubbed down. Hopefully that will seal the wood and give a slightly stronger surface for us to reinforce it with tape. Now the tape I'm going to use is this stuff. This is what I've used on my other Draks, leading edge reinforcement, all kinds of stuff. It's amazing. It's now called American duct tape rather than Jaffa tape. It's exactly the same stuff, and I've got myself a new roll because it just gets used in loads of places in the hobby, and because it's nice and colourful, it's easy to spot in the air. I'm going to put two pieces on it, one on the top and one on the bottom, overlap them so they're stuck to each other, and that will make this thing pretty bulletproof. In terms of the hinge, I'm going to use this. This is, if it'll focus, this is Blenderm tape, 3M Blenderm tape. It's relatively expensive, but you don't need a lot. I'm going to put a hinge line of tape on the top, turn it over, and put one on the bottom. This is how I've done my Caipirinha 2 from Team Black Sheep. This is how I've done my Nano Drak, and 2 years later, both of those hinges are still absolutely perfect. So here it is covered in the tape. Hopefully you can see how nicely that looks. With the tape on and the paint underneath, this is going to be pretty bulletproof. And by offering it up, hopefully you can see how well I did trying to get the wing to be nice and straight and level. Now the next job then is to pull off a piece of Blenderm tape and stick it half on the aileron, half off, offer it up to the wing, and then stick it down securely, and it should hopefully look something like that once it's in place. Now this is just a single layer of Blender, and we need to do the other side as well, so flip it over, get yourself another length of Blender and stick it over the aileron while it's in that kind of position, and then you'll have a really flexible joint. With both of the bits of Blender in place, then the hinge will look something like this. So there we go, that is my Blenderm hinge all done, ready for the installation of servos and other pieces. So now that is done, there's only a handful of extra little things that we need to do in order to finish this off. So let me cover the last handful of steps. I've 3D printed these catches for the different hatches, as well as a rotating catch for the back of the two auxiliary hatches towards the rear. I've also glued in the Velcro onto the recesses, both under the wing and in the body, and that will keep the wings in place. And then finally, I've glued the wing tips onto the end. I'd recommend putting the wings vertically and then seating the wing ends. Take your time to make sure they're exactly the same both sides, and then let that set up overnight, and it should end up looking something like this. And here it is in the flesh. A lot bigger than I expected. That's because I got the longer wings. So hopefully here you can kind of see all the little tweaks that I've done, and the fact that I've made these little things removable without any kind of additional catches or hatches. There are some extra things we're going to have to do in the next video when we install the electronics, and that is there is no spaces cut in here for the servo, so I'm going to have to actually cut the servo holes. Probably going to go with 9-gram digital metal geared servos, a nice little flight controller, probably iNav, conventional FPV, maybe something like RunCam hybrid or split or whatever it is in the nose so I can record HD. This isn't going to be anywhere near as quick as its bigger brother. And let me talk about size, because that is the question that I get asked about a lot for the plane. First of all is how big is it compared to the Mini Drak? Well, if you put these Mini Drak and this Nano Drak side by side, because I bought the 40-inch wings, it's exactly the same width, which is why I'm having to hold one of the wings behind my head. So each of these wings is about 41 centimeters long, and then you have an extra kind of 4 or 5 millimeters each end for the other bits. The body itself is about 19 centimeters wide, so overall that gives you about 40 inches. So it's the same width as my Mini Drak, which I hadn't appreciated when I ordered it, but then I've gone for the big wings because this is more of a kind of an explorer, soarer, rather than out and out speed machine. I've got the Mini Drak for that. In terms of the length of the main body, it is different dimensionally from that. Although it's only kind of 19 centimeters from side to side, it's about 4 inches shorter than its bigger brother. So there is a little bit less room in here. And it's also compartmentalized. So we're going to have a space for the flight controller. And we're also going to have a space for the battery. So flight controller, ESC, potentially the GPS will be somebody in here. Battery is going to be at the front with the FPV camera here. Probably the video transmitter in one of these auxiliary bays. Maybe the receiver in the other. We will figure that out in the next video. So join me for that, where hopefully now, if you're at the same point that I am, you have this thing built. It's now time to start selecting and putting in the electronics. Thank you for watching my video and watching right to the very end. If you want to find out what I'm currently working on, you can follow me on social media by searching for Painless360 in the usual places. If you'd like to become part of the inner circle, then you can become a Patreon. Details are in the description and you get lots of additional benefits. Check out the playlist section on the channel too. I organise all of my videos into playlists and it's called something like Introduction to or for Beginners. All of the content is aimed so that you can start at the very beginning and it teaches you that subject, starting with simple principles and moving up to teach you everything you need to know.